A Mother's Day Murder by D. Ernst. Chapter 5. The next morning it was raining, which suited my mood perfectly. I'd slept very badly the night before, plotting various forms of ecstatic sexual reunion and/or severe mental and physical torture, with Mark as the central figure. Throw in Sam Connolly and his incredibly gorgeous eyes, and it was a pretty disrupted night. Sometimes when it rained, I drove Tessa to the bus stop, but today brought a light, warm spring shower, so we put on matching yellow fisherman's slickers and walked down the hill. Carol and company did not walk in the rain, or the snow for that matter, and when it was below 30 degrees. Taking Boot for a long walk to make up for the lack of exercise was out of the question. She did not like getting her feet wet. Yes, I know. Spaniels are sporting dogs, and you'd think they would be fine in any weather, but no, not Boot. She started dragging her feet at the third raindrop. Puddles made her whimper. What a dog. One of the advantages of the kind of community that was Mount Abrams was that certain traditions remained intact. Marie Wu, for example, moved into the farmhouse-style house across from the bus stop 5 years ago. And when she was told that her front porch was the spot the school kids would take shelter in during the rain, she just nodded and smiled. So there we were, crowding around Marie's rocking chairs and empty planters, waiting. Shelley was at the opposite end of the porch, so I couldn't fill her in on the latest Mark development, but I knew I'd talk to her later in the day. The bus came and went, and I started back up the hill. It was raining harder, and I had the hood of my slicker pulled up over my head so I didn't hear the car as it drove up beside me, until a voice was calling my name. Ellie, how about a lift? It was Doug Mitchell, his window rolled down, smiling at me. It was odd. Doug had never said more than 5 words in a row to me. Was he really trying to be a good neighbor? Why? I'm good. Ellie, it's pouring. It was pouring. What could I say? Sure, thanks. I ran around to the passenger side and jumped in the front seat. I was dripping all over his nice leather interior. Oh, Doug, I'm sorry. Everything is getting wet. He was driving slowly. No worries. I'm glad I saw you walking. I need to ask you a question. I was busy with my seatbelt. Yes, I was only 2 minutes away from home, but well, it was a thing. Sure. What? Why were you in Jordan's room yesterday? I opened my mouth. Then I shut it. I swallowed hard. What are you talking about? I said, very proud that my voice did not tremble, squeak, or crack. My heart started to beat a little faster. I was a terrible liar. More than that, I was guilty as charged. Well, you see, Ellie, when Jordan was little, he kept insisting that someone came in his room at night. So Lacey and I set up a nanny cam, just to show him that it was only his imagination, you know. These days, I just automatically reset it every night for him. It's a very sophisticated piece of equipment. Motion activated. So imagine my surprise when I looked at the log and saw that the camera went on when no one was supposed to be home. I stared straight ahead, barely breathing. His voice had started out calmly enough, but he was talking faster and faster, and his tone was changing. He sounded angry. He had a right to be. I was trying to think of a way out of this, but seriously, how could I? Caught on a nanny cam. I thought that sort of thing only happened on reality shows. We walk past your house every morning, I told him. When caught, try the truth. My father used to tell me that all the time. And yesterday, Boot chased a rabbit in your yard and we followed, and Shelley saw that your back door was open, so we went in to check to see if anything was wrong. It was a good deed sort of thing. Oh God, that sounded so lame. I see. His voice was tight. And you went upstairs because? Very good question, Doug. I stared out the window. We were almost to my house. I could leap out of the car, run inside, lock my door, and avoid him for the rest of my life. Did she send you? He whispered hoarsely. Did she? He suddenly sounded afraid. Of what? I turned to him. Did who send me? His jaw was clenched and his hand gripped the steering wheel like it was the last link to the real world. I didn't think she made any friends, but of course she'd use you against me. He seemed to be talking to himself more than to me. He was white as a sheet and sweat had broken out across his forehead. What did she send you there for? Doug, I said slowly and a little loudly because honestly I was starting to panic. He was freaking out about something. I don't know what you're talking about. He jammed on the brakes, put the car in park, and turned in his seat. He looked desperate, and I was suddenly afraid. This was not about me being in Jordan's room. There was a lot more than that. What did he tell you? He asked harshly. You know she's a liar, don't you? I laid my hand slowly on the latch to open the car door. I needed to be away from here. This had gone from embarrassing to scary to something totally beyond scary in just a few heartbeats. I lifted the latch gently, but of course it was locked. Doug, who are you talking about? He lunged forward, his face suddenly inches from mine. She got everything she wanted, he screamed at me. She said she would leave us alone. He had to be talking about Lacey. Why had she left, and why was he so terrified of her coming back? I was done. My blood was pounding so hard I could feel it trying to burst through my heart and out of my chest. I looked down, found the lock button, pressed it, and pushed the car door open. He grabbed me, caught my wrist, and twisted. There was a spurt of real pain, but I jerked my arm and his fist closed on the sleeve of my rain slicker. I pulled away, leaving him holding the empty slicker, and went running into the rain and up the street towards my house. I was afraid to look back. He was in a car. He was obviously crazy. What if he tried to run me over? I swerved off the street and jumped up on the stone wall bordering my yard. I immediately slipped, falling on my face in the wet grass, but at least I was on the other side. He couldn't run me over without plowing through 100-year-old pudding stone and mortar. I struggled to my feet, soaked, sprinted through the backyard, and then slowed enough to glance over my shoulder. Doug's car had not moved. It was still in the middle of the street, wipers on, motor idling, my bright yellow slicker spilling out of the open car door. I ran through the lilac bushes, up the steps, and into the house. I locked the back door with unsteady hands. Then I raced to the front door and through the deadbolt. I sank to the floor, shaking uncontrollably, breathing in great gulps. Boot whimpering by my side. I had texted Maggie. I was still huddled on the floor when Boot started barking. Seconds later, there was a pounding on the door behind me. Ellie, are you okay? I struggled to my feet and unlocked the door. Maggie was standing there, Vivian Brewster behind her. She came in, grabbed my arm, and pushed me back into the kitchen. You need tea, she said. I sat down. My breathing was back to normal, but I was drenched and felt cold. I think I was shivering. Viv had been in my house enough times to know my kitchen, and she pulled out mugs and tea bags. Maggie had vanished, but returned with a throw from the living room and put it around my shoulders. I wiped my face with the corner of the throw and pulled it tightly around me. There was silence until a mug of tea was put in front of me. I took a grateful sip and closed my eyes. Do you want to call the police? Maggie asked. I shook my head. Ellie, you sent me a text that Doug was after you. Are you sure? I took another sip. Is he still parked out front? No, Viv said. He has my slicker. My teeth had stopped chattering. We'll get it back, Maggie said. What happened? I told them. I looked into my tea, sipping as I spoke. When I was done, I looked back up at them. What should I do? Viv sat back, folded her arms across her chest, and shook her head. Girl, you are into something here. Vivian Brewster, besides being a very successful businesswoman, was the kind of person you wanted in a dire emergency because she never seemed fazed by events around her. A few years ago, when Hurricane Sandy came through and Mount Abrams was without power for 8 days, she got the key to Josiah Abrams' original summer retreat, which had become a clubhouse for the Lake Association. It still had gas for cooking and a fireplace in every room, and she set up a place where we could all come and get warm and fed. She was also beautiful, with skin the color of coffee with a hint of cream, high cheekbones, and wide, dark eyes. She could easily have been taken for an African princess, but when she opened her mouth, Bayam would come out. She wagged her finger at me. Breaking into that house? You both know those people aren't right. And now you have him going all kinds of crazy on you, and not in a good way. She shook her head again. What were you all thinking? Just hearing Viv's voice made me feel better. I love Maggie to death, but despite her coolness and bravado, most of the time she tended to be useless in a crisis. Thank God for her husband, because every time Sarah skinned a knee or bumped her head, Maggie would get hysterical while Derek applied first aid. With Viv in my kitchen, I wouldn't have cared if Doug came through the door with a machete. I think he was really scared of something, I said, putting down my mug and running my hand through my damp hair. And who did he mean by she? Lacey? I thought you all thought that he was the one to be afraid of, Viv said. I know, I said, but who else could he have been talking about? We sat in silence. The rain had stopped, and the breeze coming into the house was warm and damp. I was feeling less chilled, but needed to get out of my wet clothes. I'm fine now. Honestly, I was just, panicked, I said. I don't blame you. Doug doesn't sound very stable, Maggie said. I shook my head. No, he wasn't. What are you going to do tomorrow morning at the bus stop when you see him? Pretend this never happened? Viv asked. I shrugged. I don't know. I'll figure something out. But I never had to. When Tessa came off the bus, she told me that Jordan was pulled out of class before lunchtime. The jungle drums sounded quickly, and by the time I was getting ready for my date with Sam Canali, I got a text from Maggie. She had just left the library and had heard from Carol Anderson that Doug withdrew both boys from school. He told Denise Whitmore, school secretary and Carol's yoga buddy, that he and the boys were going to be staying at Doug's sister, beginning immediately and for an infinite amount of time. Getting ready for a date when you haven't had one since before the existence of the internet is not nearly as much fun as it sounds, especially when you can't fit into anything that looks even remotely sexy because all the sexy clothes are size 10 and you're not quite there yet. Tessa was of no help because she didn't think I should be going out at all. Kate viewed the entire operation with ill-concealed amusement. It's only a drink, Mom. Or are you expecting something more? I tore my eyes from my once again disappointing image in the mirror and glared at her. No, I am not expecting anything more. But my generation has a different definition of the word date. We don't just accidentally bump into each other and decide to hang out or hook up or whatever else you millennials do. We plan ahead and try to make a nice impression. I pulled off outfit number 6, decided a skirt or dress was too fussy anyway, and started hauling out my dress pants. I knew I had black pants from the Gap that I bought last winter, but they were actually too big. I found a dark purple tunic I had for a couple of years with black embossing on the shoulders and V-neck and long flowing sleeves. A little hippy-dippy, but it fell mid-thigh and hid the fact that the pants were too big and were in fact being held up by a bright green belt. You could wear leggings with that, Kate said. She was sprawled on my bed watching. I turned around and looked at myself from the back. Women with hips like mine should not be wearing leggings, I muttered. The bulk around my waist was noticeable. Just perfect. If you wear them with that shirt, you'll look fine, Kate said. I don't own leggings, I told her. She got off the bed and ran out. I stared at myself unhappily for a few seconds, then undid the pants and let them drop to the floor. I was running out of options as I stepped out of the pants and kicked them to the corner. Kate came in, holding a jumble of black in her cowboy boots. Here, put these on. I held up the leggings. You weigh like nothing. These will never fit. One size fits all, she insisted. I sat down and started pulling them on. Yes, the leggings were tight, but not uncomfortable, and I could feel where they were all packing in my flabby bits, like sausage, into a casing. I got up and looked at the mirror again. Wow, this might work, I said, surprised. Try on the boots, she said. Our foot size was the only size we shared. The boots were black with deep gold embellishment, added a few inches to my height, and looked much cooler than I felt. Kate grinned. My work here is done. Some gold jewelry and you'll knock 'em dead, she said as she walked out. I looked at myself in the back again. Much better. I found a long gold necklace and some dangly earrings and decided I looked just fine. I had told Kate about what had happened with Doug, and although she did not seem concerned, I did not want my two daughters home alone. On my way out, I gave Kate $20, told her to head to the mall with Tessa, buy something for dinner, and plan on getting home around 10. Tessa's eyes lit up at the prospect of being out so late on a school night, almost distracting her from her disapproval of my date. I kissed them goodbye and drove slowly past the Mitchell house. There were no lights, and the left side of the garage was open and empty. Doug had not returned from wherever he'd taken his sons. Besides, I'd only be gone an hour. Nicola's was on the other side of Lawrence, a nice Italian bistro with a very comfortable bar and live music on the weekends. I pulled into the parking lot, soothed my hair, and went inside. He was waiting for me, which made me smile. He had snagged a booth in the back and was nursing what looked to be a scotch. I slid into booth and smoothed my hair again. It hadn't rained since the morning, but it was humid and my hair had a tendency to frizz, even after being doused with Moroccan oil. Hi, I said, somewhat breathlessly. Hello, he said. You look lovely. He raised his hand to signal the waitress. Thanks, I said. My daughter is very good at dressing me. He raised an eyebrow. The 10-year-old? The waitress materialized. White wine, I said. She nodded. Sure, something to snack on? Would you like to see a menu? I would have loved to see a menu and probably would have ordered stuffed potato skins, loaded nachos, and fried mac and cheese balls. Luckily, Sam intervened. Maybe just some spiced almonds, unless you... He looked over at me and I shook my head. That sounds great, I said to the waitress. She vanished and I turned my attention back to Sam. Actually, I also have a 24-year-old. She's the one that contributed to this evening's outfit. He smiled broadly and nodded. I see. That must be interesting, two daughters so far apart in age. Are they very much alike? I shook my head. Caitlin, she's the oldest, takes after her father. Red-headed, slender, freckles everywhere. And she's an absolute brain. Tessa looks like me, and she's just your average super smart kid, which is fine with me. One genius in the family is more than enough. He drank some scotch. How long ago were you divorced? 4 years. You? 7. He stopped talking while the waitress set down my wine, then the almonds. It was hard, he continued. I did not want my marriage to end. But I could see her point. My job made things very difficult. Shortly after that, I retired from the force and came out here. Life is much easier for the police here in Lawrence. I took an almond and nibbled one end. Speaking of which, did you find anything out about Lacey Mitchell? Ah, he said. Yes, I did. Silence. I sipped some wine. And? Really now, Ellie, do you think I should be telling you such things? The thing is, I reasoned, I am the one who came to you, remember? Maybe just a hint? He shook his head. Oh, come on, just one thing, okay? Like, if Doug has ever been, arrested for anything? No, he has never been arrested, Sam said. I made a face. Well, I guess since this is a date, I'll stop pumping you for information. He threw back his head and laughed. Thank you. I'd hate to spend the evening trying to evade your clever and subtle questioning. I'm sure I'd find it exhausting. I laughed with him. Yeah, that's me. Clever and subtle. He looked good. He was wearing a lightweight V-neck sweater over a t-shirt. A look I usually didn't think too much of, but on him, perfect. So, he said, Should we spend the next half hour bashing our ex-spouses? I don't have much to say about mine, and I'd much rather talk of other things, but I'd be happy to give the opportunity. He spoke very carefully. Is that how most of your dates start off? Dragging exes through the mud? He shrugged. It happens. Frequently. It seems you women have to say about the men in your lives. I sipped my wine. That's interesting. I mean, that's what my girlfriends are for. I'd much rather spend my time dazzling you with my charm, wit, and boundless sex appeal. He laughed again. Excellent. I was hoping you were different. So tell me something else. Did you have a happy childhood? Very. My mom and dad stayed married until he died. My brother and I were very close, still are, and I even had a pony. No trauma, no drama, no secrets. How about you? I was the youngest of 6. My parents had no money when they came to this country, just a horde of children and the address of an uncle in Albany. He let us live in his basement until my parents found jobs. Our family's proudest moment was when we moved into our own 3-bedroom row house. All of us kids work. My father had 2 jobs, and my mother also worked and took care of us all. They never let go of their old ways that made sure each of their children was 100% American. The name on my original birth certificate is unpronounceable, even to me. My parents changed my name to Sam when they moved here, after Uncle Sam. We became citizens as soon as we could. I loved the history, but was encouraged to study only American history. Turkey's past is long and illustrious, but also filled with much regret. He shrugged. My father was in the army when he was young. I imagine he did terrible things. That's probably why they left. I was fascinated. Did you ever ask them about the past? He shrugged. They wouldn't talk about it, and we never asked. My oldest brother went back to Turkey and lived there for some time, but he eventually returned to the States. If he learned anything while he was there, he never said. He took a long drink. We were a close and loving family, but there were boundaries, and as children, we learned to respect those boundaries. I sat back. It would drive me crazy to think that there was a family history that I didn't know. He smiled. It drove me crazy, too. It still does. But my parents are still alive, and I will not disrespect them. When they are gone, he lifted his shoulders, then let them drop. I am, after all, a detective. Have you ever been back to Turkey? He shook his head. One day I will go, but only when I know that, if I choose, I can stay. I think that once I am there, I will be taken in. I propped my arm on the table and put my chin in my palm. Wow. He raised his eyebrows. Did you just say wow? Yes, I mean, that's an amazing thing to say. You must know yourself very well. Of course. After all, I've lived with myself for a very long time. I have too, but I'm still a work in progress. I never know what I'm going to do from one moment to the next. I picked up another almond and examined it closely. For instance, I never imagined myself asking a man I just met out for a drink. Oh, you don't date much? I don't date at all. He sat back. Really? But you're an attractive woman. Surely I'm not the first man in 4 years to notice. I chewed the almond. Well, you see, I work from home, so workplace romance is kind of off the table. Since most of my friends are, married, I don't have many opportunities to go trolling for men. He took it in. So that is why you don't have anything bad to say about your ex-husband? You're still in love with him? I choked on a piece of almond and gulped down more wine. You really are a detective. He smiled in response. It's complicated, I said, and you're making it even more so. Good. More wine? I shook my head. No, thank you. I'm driving, so I limit myself to one. Besides, I can't stay much longer. I need to get back. Why? Are you worried about something? I shook my head, but could feel my color rising. I was a terrible liar. Why did you ask if Doug Mitchell had ever been arrested? Has he done something that made you think that? Other than lying, that is. Man, he was good. So again, I tried the truth. I was just curious, but maybe you should know that he pulled his kids out of school today and shipped them off somewhere. He frowned. Really? How do you know this? I made a face. Are you pumping me for information now? He shook his head. No, it's just interesting. That's all. My wine glass was empty. My friend Carol, who works at the library, has a yoga buddy who's the elementary school secretary. Mount Abrams is pretty well connected. Apparently. I reached for my purse. I have to go. I'm sorry, but would you like to do this again? Of course. Next time, a whole dinner? I nodded as I got up, and he stood with me. We walked out into the parking lot together, and he waited patiently as I unlocked my car. I felt my heart jump a little. Well, thanks. I could see his smile in the darkness. You're welcome, he said, and he reached over and drew me towards him. Even with the boots on, I had to stand on my toes, and he bent down to kiss me. This was not just a pleasant tingle. This was like a jolt of electricity that went right through my boots, into the pavement, and it made me grip the fabric of his shirt with both hands. His arms tightened around me and his strength, and he hit me so hard that when I finally stepped away, I expected to see my clothes fall to the ground in ashes. Wow again, I managed. Indeed. So you'll call? I asked. Absolutely. And I believed him. There was so much to talk about the next morning that I thought we'd have to walk around the lake twice. Doug had not turned up at the bus stop, and since every mom in Mount Abrams knew why, but didn't want to say anything in front of their children, after the bus left, the moms stood in a tight circle, and speculation ran wild. I kept my mouth shut. I had a very strong feeling that Doug had run off with his sons because he was frightened of something, and the thought that maybe I was part of that made me feel queasy. I didn't know what he thought I'd done, but somehow my being in his house set him off. Well, you certainly can't blame yourself for everything, Shelley said as we trudged up the hill. Boot was walking as far away from the puddles as she could. What a princess. We did break into his house, I said. I mean, nanny cam. It's interesting, though, Carol said. He could have called the police. If it was about you being in his house, that's what he should have done. But instead he went after you himself. Very odd behavior. Gee, you think? Maggie said. Ellie was scared to death yesterday. That's beyond odd. Actually, Doug was scared to death. I wish I hadn't run away from him. Maybe I could have found out what he was so upset about. I tugged Boot's leash. The rain had kick-started spring. It seemed that everything was a few inches taller than it had been just a few days before. The air smelled clean and the birds were singing, and aside from the nagging of my conscience about Doug, I felt very happy. And Shelley, who could read me like a book, decided she couldn't hold it in any longer. And now I want to hear all about your date. Details, woman. Every last one. I was smiling. I couldn't help it. I had a lovely time. Shelley made a noise that suggested complete and utter disgust. That is not a detail. That's a non-detail. We reached the top of the hill and rounded the corner when Maggie stopped short. He's back, she said, staring at the Mitchell house, sitting on the other side of the lake. We all looked. The garage door was open. It was only down when Doug was home, which meant sometime last night he had returned without his sons. I thought he was staying with a sister, too, Shelley muttered as we walked quickly towards the clubhouse. I almost veered off and went home, but that felt cowardly. Doug and I had both behaved badly, and as much as I would have liked to avoid him for the rest of my life, if he was back, avoidance would be highly improbable. Besides, it wasn't like he was sitting on the front porch watching us. Do you think he's watching us? Shelley wondered out loud. Like, from the upstairs window there? Thanks, Shell, I said. He's probably had to get clothes and stuff for the boys. We hurried along the path for a few minutes, then settled back into our usual pace. Okay, Carol said. You were about to give us a blow-by-blow of your date with Detective Connolly. You first, I said. Didn't you have coffee with Leon? She sniffed. He has allergies. Coffee tomorrow. Your turn. I took a breath. He's very interesting. I like talking to him. We laughed, found a few things in common, I think, and we're having dinner together soon. And we shared a most excellent kiss. Then why aren't you doing a happy dance? Shelley asked. I'm a little confused, I said, because of Mark. Maggie frowned. What about Mark? Well, he told me he still loved me and that he missed me. I took a few steps before I realized everyone else had stopped in their tracks. I turned and they were all staring at me. What? Your ex-husband Mark? Shelley asked. That miserable piece of... Now, Shelley, Carol broke in. It's not entirely uncommon for couples to reconnect. Shelley whirled to face Carol. After what he put her through? She then glared at me. I hope you told him exactly where he could put that idea. We never got to talk about it. He kissed me, then left. Kissed you? Shelley said, her voice raising about an octave. Yes, and it was quite a kiss, let me tell you that. If it hadn't been so expected, we might well have reenacted our entire honeymoon right there on the living room rug. She marched forward. Did you tell him about the hottie? Well, I said, getting in step beside her. I didn't actually use the word hottie, but I did say I had a date. And that's when he kissed you? She asked. Yes. I didn't particularly like where the conversation was headed. Shelley said. I glanced back at Maggie. What do you think? I'm happily married, she said. I'm happily married too, Shelley said. I'm just older and wiser than you, Maggie. Carol was married forever, and I bet even she's rolling her eyes. You must admit, Carol said very carefully, the timing is suspect. On the bright side, you certainly got enough action this week to keep you going for a while. We walked the rest of the way around the lake in silence. Although I didn't like to think that Mark would really be that kind of man to mess with my head like that, Carol was right. The timing was, at the very least, suspect. We were nearing the Mitchell house, and my brain suddenly went off in a completely different direction. He's still there, I said. Let's hurry. We picked up the pace as we walked past the house. I had visions of him bursting out of the front door screaming. Or maybe he was hiding on the porch and would come up behind me. Listen, Maggie said. We stopped. The house was silent, but there was a quiet rumble coming from the garage. What is that, a generator? Carol whispered. Shelley tightened her grip on Buster's leash as we walked slowly up the drive. Does that sound like a car engine to you? She asked. Oh my God, Carol breathed. She ran up to the garage, bent, and pulled the door up and open. Maggie was right behind her. The smell of exhaust almost knocked us over. Carol turned, her face white. Call 911, he's in there. And then Maggie began to scream.